So what I'd like to discuss now is an overview of the consciousness, the science of consciousness, specifically as it applies to training in meditation and the phases of development for remote viewing and doing the coherent thought sequencing, so that you have a very clear understanding of it. And the first thing that has to be understood is the nature of awareness. So awareness is, as you're all listening to my voice, take just a moment to watch yourself listening. So as I'm speaking, just look at how it is that you're awake, listening and hearing my voice. What is that? You're conscious. You're awake. Okay, now subtract my voice, what you're seeing with your eyes, your thoughts, your perception of your body, your perception of your ego, your individuality. There's still awareness there. That's all it is. That's all it is. It's very zen. So you're awake, and it's really about becoming aware of awareness, with the mind becoming, as it were, pure and clear and empty of any distractions. And so then you're just there, immersed in quiet mind, without the perceptions of discrete objects of perception, whether it be thoughts, self, material, body, sounds, any of it. Now, all meditation techniques, if they are effective, are intended to allow the practitioner to experience the state of being awake within pure awareness, without any perception of a relative, discrete perception, meaning you're only aware of awareness and nothing else. It's that plane of absolute, pure, awake mind. It's been called samadhi, nirvana, the beatific state in the ancient Christian Gnostic period. It's many, many names for it, but it's a very pure and clear state of silent mind. So whether you use your breath, and one of the techniques I taught last night is a Zen meditation technique, where you breathe in with your nose and out with your mouth, and with each breath in, you're seeing this energy coming in and awakeness, and as with each time you exhale, you're relaxing. And after you do that a few minutes, like any breath exercise, you can then go to just doing it in a more relaxed way, but the mind is watching the breath. So the breath can become the focus instead of, say, a mantra. Does that make sense? You've heard of people doing it with a candle flame. I knew a medical doctor who got into that state by playing the harp. And she got into this sort of flow consciousness and the tones of the harp, and she would go into that state playing the harp. So what I think is important to understand is that, look at it this way, that the objective is to experience the hub of the wheel of life, which is this silent, pure awareness without any distractions. That is, it's that state of enormous peace and balances. But there are billions of spokes that go to the hub of that wheel. And so each individual person on this planet, in a sense, is a spoke with its own path. Now you have to find your own path as one of those spokes, because all of us are connected to that same inner, silent, quiet hub of pure awareness. How you get to that, no matter what technique or teacher you have, is really going to be individualized. to your own unique temperament and your unique intellectual, emotional, personality, life experience. And this is where I'm very non-chauvinistic about the techniques of meditation, so long as we understand the objective of the exercise. And the objective of meditation is to experience samadhi, pure, quiet mind. And there are many, many ways of achieving that. Now, in the Sanskrit mantra meditation, the mind is using the mantra to lightly focus so that other perceptions begin to fade away and you're sort of immersed into this mantra that just repeats and repeats and repeats. But in reality, all meditation techniques, including the mantra meditation, has as its goal the ending of the meditation as you dissolve into unbounded mind. So you don't want to hold on to the mantra in a forced way, because then it keeps you on a superficial level. You want to be in a relaxed level, so you're viewing yourself as, the metaphor would be the mantra is your magic carpet taking you into this infinite ocean. But at a certain point you want to get off of that and just dissolve and become one with the ocean, where the drop becomes the sea and experiences the vastness of infinity and the vastness of awareness as a singularity. That is such a beautiful state of peace, and no matter what technique you use, there are thousands of them. People can drum and reach them, chant and get to that state. There are all kinds of other meditative approaches. There are literally thousands. Now, the Sanskrit mantra is a really effective one, as is the breathing technique, and those are two discrete ones. And often I say you can start with the breathing technique as a kind of a pranayama, it's called, where you're doing the breath technique and watching the breath and becoming deep, and then introduce the mantra. And so you're introducing the mantra already being settled into quiet mind. And once you're in that state, if you get distracted, which everyone does, I don't care who you are, you're going to have a thought about dinner, you're going to think about work you need to do, you're going to, something's going to cause you to get off that light focusing of the meditation technique. It is normal. Don't feel like, everyone kind of begins to castigate themselves about it and reprimand themselves. No, this is normal. So the mind is going to wander. The only thing is, don't push out the other thoughts or perceptions. Just acknowledge them and let them flow through you, and then return to the meditation technique. It's a very gentle, iterative back and forth process. And the more gentle it is, the more it's going to be successful, because the more you get irritated with trying to force it, the more you're going to stay in the monkey mind, in the intellect. And what you're really wanting to do is transcend all individuality and all time and all space into this unbounded aspect of awareness, which is simply your mind as it exists, with all the clutter removed, if you will, all the perceptions removed, even the perception of your own self, your individuality, where then you transcend and you realize you are that being, and you are all beings. So when you are in a meditative state and you experience, it's often been called sort of a period of awake but absolute nothingness. You're not asleep, but there's no perception of self, thought, sound. That is the dawning of the samadhi state. It's beautiful. You don't have to turn it into anything with bells and whistles and glamour. It's a very simple state of quiet awareness. And then, practicing this at least 2 or 3 times a day, 20, 30, 40 minutes, what you develop is this ability to be in touch with that aspect of mind that is expanded, or perhaps even infinite, even while you're doing things during the day. So you're walking down the beach or you're driving your car, but you're still in touch with that larger aspect of mind. And therefore you develop over the horizon radar, let's call it. You develop the remote viewing capability to see ahead. And you see where the police cars are. They have speed traps up. Very handy. Or, not being silly, but not really, I do that. And so what you begin to realize is that you don't have to then just be in a meditation to access the non-local, the undifferentiated, expanded mind, because it's always there anyway. You just have to bring it to mind. When I was hiking on the beach this morning, between 12 and 1, morning for us, since I got up at 11:30, I went to bed at 4:30. There was, I was practicing that, so I'm going along and working out, and I was connecting to mind, and I was actually in an expanded state, seeing myself, like watching. I was present within myself and enjoying the body, but I was also in that unbounded mind watching all of this in great mirth and joy. You see? So that's something you can begin to practice too. It's called awaking or walking meditation. And as you develop this faculty, if you want to look at this ability to be in a meditative state, it begins to be easier and easier and easier. I liken it to if the first time you drove here, you kind of got lost, and it's here and it's there and it's turned, and it's dark and it's at night. The second time, easier. Fourth or fifth time, you're on autopilot. It's just, you know how to go. It's the same thing with this. It's a skill set. It's an ability. And the more you do it and practice it, the easier it becomes. The problem is most people don't stick with it long enough to reach that point of skill. And so it's about being diligent and having the discipline to stay with it for long enough to have those breakthrough moments in the meditative capability. And then once you do, you go, aha. Now, so that's really, if you understand that and the nature of mind, then you understand how remote viewing is going to work. Because the nature of the conscious mind is that we identify it with our individual ego. But in reality, the fact that we're all awake is that there is, if you will, a ray of this infinite sun illuminating Mark's window and his window and Daniel's window of his soul and Steve's window. But the source of that, if you will, the spirit essence of that awake mind is this infinite aware state of self. And it's always there. So we can either cut ourselves off from the source, or we can give ourselves to it and enjoy being in that. That's a choice. That is an act of volition. And it's actually incredibly simple once you understand what it is. Most people are thinking that, where do I have to go, and da-da-da. They make it, a much more difficult thing. And I think there's been an attempt over the years, because of the acquisition of demagoguery and power around spiritual institutions that become organized religion, to make everything seem more difficult than it is. The truth is, and that's my social commentary for the moment, is that in reality it's incredibly simple and everyone can do it. And all you have to do is know that you can. Now, this then speaks to the question of the sort of rewiring of your attitude. Because if you say, oh, I can't do it, but Guru and Swami so-and-so can, or I can't do it, but the Dalai Lama can, or I can't do it, but Steve can, or someone can. This is, you're programming yourself not to be able to do it. All right? So there's a wonderful saying, as ye have faith, so shall your powers and blessings be. As you have confidence is what it really means, and positive, affirmative attitude, you'll be able to do it. But think about your life. I mean, as a medical doctor, if I believed I couldn't defibrillate that person or get a chest tube in or get an intraosseous IV into a neonate that is dying, and I started glitching and believed I couldn't do it, I wouldn't be able to do it. So there's the practice and expertise, but you also have to have that combined with confidence in yourself and belief in yourself that you can do it. And don't buy into this trap that you've got to somehow have some guru or somebody who is leading you around by the nose every day, every minute of your life. My purpose is to share what I know and hand it off and let people run with it. I don't want to be anyone's guru. I abhor such things, actually. And anyone who tries to turn their relationship with me into that, I do every profane and obnoxious thing possible to drive them away. No, I do. I do deliberately, because I've seen the consequences of doing the other. I'm very sincere about that. So, the method to my madness. And so this concept of the aware mind and the nature of consciousness. Now let's talk about what's the scientific basis for this. There is a huge amount over the last 40 years that have come forward, although the mainstream press covers it up. And as many of you know, Dr. John at Princeton started doing experiments with random number generators that would spit out zeros or ones, and they would get people who just would sit, not touch it, but just with their mind and thought intend it to be more zeros or more ones. And there is a statistically significant shift towards what the intent was, showing that mind is omnipresent, including inside some dumb little machine, a random number generator. This was then expanded to where, and I spoke to Dr. Bob John, and I spoke about this years ago. He was professor emeritus of engineering at Princeton University. And basically what he said, he had a very interesting perspective. What we're doing with CE5 is, in a sense, a clinical, real-world experiment with the power of the mind with a group of people, of what he was doing in the laboratory with random number generators. But the principle is the same, because if we acknowledge that that consciousness is not limited to the dimensions of our physical body, and that actually our own awake mind is all the time omnipresent, whether we acknowledge it or not. We just simply have to acknowledge it. Once you have that little bit of knowledge and believe it and begin to experiment with it, magic happens. Amazing things start happening. So that is the first step. And they also found with the laboratory at Princeton that if you had, say, two people that loved each other or were very close to each other do this random number generator experience, the effect was not doubled, it was exponential, 10 times or more the effect in terms of the effect it would have on the random number generator. So what happens when there are 28 people out meditating doing what we're doing if we understand and believe this? Well, last night is what happens. See what I mean? So the same has been done if you look at the studies that Dr. Dossi, Larry Dossi, who's a medical doctor and internist in Dallas, that did on intercessionary prayer studies, and he compiled these, and they found that people could be in another continent, and that if they could put their awareness and pray for someone who was very sick, but instead of specifically saying, I want this to happen, sort of like thy will be done, and put them in this sort of greater conscious intent of healing, of asking for healing as opposed to very, very specific, was more effective, ironically. There would be these amazing documentable effects. And then they did studies where they would take people's saliva and their white blood cells in your saliva, and they'd fly it to Hawaii and keep it in a dish so it was still living. And they can register over the membrane of the white blood cells the emotional reactions of people who were having some kind of an experience, even though it was just part of their living matrix, and it was thousands of miles away. Now these have been reproduced. And also, in the physics journals back in the, I believe it was late 80s, early 90s, the physicists were doing experiments with photons. And they found that when the scientists were anticipating changing the opening, the aperture of where the photon would go, they found that the photons before they changed it, started moving in that direction precognitively. Now this was reproduced, and it was in the mainstream physics journals, and so that even the photons, which are, of course, you know, there's the wave aspect of light and there's the particle aspect, which are photons, those were consciousness and were affected by the consciousness of the experimenter. Now think about that. These are all provable, documentable cases that are in scientific research literature. So, yes?
If I might add, this is exactly right. But as a practitioner becomes more skilled at any distance, just like you're alluding to here, you're able to perceive what their problem, what their medical problem is. You're able to treat it, and you're able to determine when it's been cleared, when it gets to, as you gain skill level. Excuse me.
Right, and he's right. And there are many, many cases of what is called remote healing that way that have occurred. So the power of consciousness, the science of consciousness, that is the big science of the next millennium. Because if you look at it, the other sciences of free energy, electromagnetism, anti-gravity, those were all explicated and known, even though they got classified 50 to 100 years ago. So what I'm trying to say is, let's begin to, that has to be brought forward so we don't destroy the planet Earth, but let's also not forget that the big adventure, the big push, is in our ability today to understand the science of consciousness, of awareness, and the amazing effects it has, and the things that can facilitate it. And more interestingly, what are the applications?